Thanks very much. All I can say about the previous presentation is wow. You know, we have a high school, Sudbury Collegiate, about 120 years old. The school itself started 170 years ago, I think they said. We've got the graffiti inside that's been declared heritage as well in the end. So it's interesting to see the solutions you came up with. As Richard says, our school board, 150 buildings, ranging from 1 year old to 150 years old. We're one of, I like to refer to us as one of Ottawa's biggest landlords. We have about 10 million square feet of buildings across the district. Well over 2,000 acres of land. And when you start to put that together, it really talks about sustainability. I came to the board in 1996. School boards had already begun thinking about, back then we referred to it as energy management, because it was cost control. Those price hikes that hit in the 70s and 80s were what were driving school boards. The first thing you did was you went through and you unscrewed every second tube in the building. And that left you with ineffective learning areas. So boards work together, and I understand you have the same collaboration here. The 4 school boards, at that time there were 3, worked closely with the colleges and universities on everything from procurement of electricity, of gas, and of some of our engineering services. So we helped to move forward. We took a big step forward about 10 years ago. We realized that there was more to this than simply saving money. Obviously, for an organization like us, we've managed to generate approximately $3 million in either savings or foregone costs, which we've been able to plow back into classroom services. You know, school boards, by nature, we're bureaucratic, we're slow moving, we're not good risk takers. Our budget is about $1 billion a year. But the fact of the matter is, with ministry control, we have a lot of hoops to go through to run projects. I can't borrow money without the approval of the Ministry of Education. On the occasions that they give us money for a new school, one of the conditions is they want it built in 24 months. And we haven't had any money to design it, and I'm not sure about the region of Sudbury, but I can tell you to just get site plan approval in Ottawa, it takes you a year. So we have challenges, just like every one of you. We're fortunate in there is a strong research bent in the area. We're fortunate that we do have a strong base of contractors to select from. But why do we do it? I couldn't stand here as the chief financial officer and say it isn't because of the money. The money's great, but you know, it really is just a way of keeping score. We have found the biggest improvements as we moved ahead with our sustainability and energy management projects. Better learning spaces for kids. When you've got a properly lit room, when the kids don't have to wear a jacket because of the draft coming in through the windows, or little snow banks building up on the window ledge, they learn better. We know that we've got to move towards standardization. We're an amalgamation of 2 school boards, schools that were built, as I said, over a century. We have every kind of system in our buildings, from buildings with no ventilation to one whose main exhaust fan was actually a propeller taken off an old ship sitting in the giant air shaft. One of the things we've been able to do as we move forward with our retrofits, our conversions of our boilers, is to improve standardization. We're a big board, we're fortunate. We have 85 of our own tradespeople. It's getting more difficult to get good tradespeople and to retain them. And so when we can get to 3, 4, or 5 types of boilers, 1 set of building control systems, it makes it easier for us to maintain the system, it makes it easier for us to train our people. Our building operators are our chief custodians. Again, they've entered our system over the years. We've got a wide range of skills. And their job isn't just operating building systems. It's cleaning, it's being ambassador, It's helping direct traffic during the day, and like you, in the winter, they're spending half their time outside shoveling, snow blowing. So we needed to make sure it's something that the building operators could be involved in. And finally, and I think this is something that I've come to realize, more than anything else, it's the right thing to do. We began this meeting by acknowledging that we're on the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe. In Ottawa, we sit on land that was never ceded by the Algonquin Nation. There has been no land settlement. When we listen to the elders that speak to us, Barbara Dumont Hill, Albert Dumont, many of the folks that come and help us open our meetings, we owe a duty of care to this land, and we owe it to the generations that will follow us. And I say that I'm old enough to remember a book that was written in the 60s by a woman named Rachel Carson, and I was so disappointed when I found out she was no relation. 55 years ago, she predicted and identified what was coming at us. In a lot of ways, my generation didn't do much about it. So our job is to help clean up some of that mess and to try to prepare the way forward. We have 75,000 students in our buildings. We have 8,000 staff. We have thousands of people in our buildings in the evenings. And so that's why we are so committed to this. It's the right thing to do. We have committed to a greenhouse gas reduction target. We had originally identified 10% by 2023. We moved it to 15. I will tell you that my team and I argue a lot. I want it to be 20 just because it's a round number. And I do think we can get there. Their concern has been the availability of funding. And we do know that funding was reduced recently for projects that were specifically aimed at reducing greenhouse gas emissions. But the fact is, every time we come in and work on a school, we can have an impact on our buildings. You know, we talk about it in retrofitting our buildings, and it's the same for school boards across the province. It's the same for hospitals and universities. For the last 50 years, the first thing that ever gets cut in a budget is maintenance dollars and planned renewal of buildings. So a school board like ours, where the replacement cost of the buildings is probably $2 to $2.5 billion, we have what's called a backlog of maintenance of about $700 million. Now, it's worse than it sounds. It's a calculated figure. It's one of the measures that we use. And it's based on the expected life of building components. But it is a true measure, and it's used as a proxy by the province, across school boards, across this province, and it helps them decide when they are allocating out dollars for major retrofits. We used to get between $15 and $20 million a year for those retrofits. The last 3 years, the total, including the greenhouse gas money, was closer to $75 million. I can tell you that in Ottawa, we have often said, what's the maximum capacity of the building trades? We found it, we went past it. Between the work on Parliament Hill, between the work in hospitals and colleges and universities and the 4 school boards, we were bringing in plumbers from Montreal this summer. It's a challenge that we all have to face, but after all those years of complaining about wanting the money, we were glad to implement projects. Everything from windows to roofs. When we can do those building envelope features and improve that, it has an amazing impact on our buildings. Years ago, we converted to a central control system, which works most of the time. But one of the things that's amazing with that is the live monitoring allows us to use it in the classroom. Every teacher has access to that data, so when the kids are studying, whether it's math or science or whatever project they're working on, the problems can be based on a real-life situation. If you're talking about percentages, what happens to a building's energy consumption at recess? I call it recess, I'm not sure what we call them anymore. What happens to a building's consumption? You can see it drop. What happens when it goes up? Why is it high in the evening? Because we've got evening school going on. It's an important feature for us, that live monitoring, and the interaction with kids is so very, very important to us. We have looked at a number of initiatives. We've worked very closely with partners in Ottawa. Years ago, we got on board when the province first announced the microfit solar projects. We own 14 microfit projects on our roofs, generating solar electricity that we sell back into the grid. Because we're not allowed to borrow money, we have 29 schools where we lease the rooftops to outside agencies. And in the last 3 years, we've added solar panels on 6 schools using that greenhouse gas reduction funding, which provide net metering savings to us. All in all, that's generating about $450,000, $500,000 a year so far. And it's the right thing to do. We talk about solar a lot. People love to be able to cut ribbons. They love to see the video that the drones take of flying over the solar panels. And we have more to do. You know, solar panels are one of those things that for school boards, we were reluctant to get into. We spend so much every year on our roofs, on maintenance, on repairs. I can tell you that the look on our maintenance people, on our roofing coordinators, when we talk about now installing something up there that's going to meet wind shear requirements, that's going to mean having to actually penetrate some of those roof membranes, we're not popular. But it can be done. You have to pick your spots. The fact of the matter is the economics of it have changed, but there are still opportunities. The other reason that we're so engaged in this, and I hate the word, but it's called a competitive advantage. As you know, we have 4 school boards in Ontario, English public and Catholic boards, French Catholic and public boards, and parents have choices. And one of the things that we try to do is make sure we don't lose kids. You know, the whole reorganization in 1998, Bill 160, was to take money away from the boards that had too much of it. That was mainly Toronto, Ottawa, to a certain extent London, and share it more equitably to the rural Catholic and French boards. And that's worked. But we want to make sure that parents who should come to the public board aren't leaving. And one of the things we found is that parents want to be part of a progressive, sustainable community. And it helps us. You know, I'm an accountant by trade. We're not known for marketing. We're not good at PR. I get a bunch of engineers working for me in facilities. When someone wants to celebrate an event, in their mind, they're supposed to be doing good work. You know, when someone says, can you come out and tell us about all of these things? It's what we do. But having said that, we know we've got to talk about it. Because we've got to spread the word. This can be done. And I say that, we're part of an organization in Ottawa called Carbon 613. It's organized about 5 years ago, I think, with the goal of providing a network for small businesses, medium-sized, and institutions to share knowledge and expertise and opportunities. It's allowed us to meet some vendors. It's allowed us to network with many of the people that are in the not-for-profit solar sector, who we don't often see. And it's allowed us to help the community. As I said, we're a big outfit, $1 billion. Our facilities department, I think the overall budget's about $100 million a year. I have the luxury of having 3 people who focus on energy management, conservation, and sustainability. So we are able to offer support, and we are committed to this. Sustainability for our school board is one of the 5 pillars in our strategic plan. Too often sustainability, we talk about it and it gets stuck on energy reduction. And believe me, that's what drives it. For an institution, energy reduction is what drives the savings, what creates some dollars for you to be able to feed back into the system. And it's done that for us. But we go beyond that. We have one staff member I refer to him as our evangelist. Tom gets out to the schools. He's the one that goes to the assemblies and talks to kids. We try to keep up with students. We have 48 of our schools are involved in what's known as the Eco Schools program. It's a provincial program. There's different levels of certification depending on the complexity of projects that kids take on. We have 2 platinum schools. We're very proud of that. But whatever level they meet, it's the fact that people are talking about it. Ottawa has a citywide composting program, green bins we call them. However, they won't come on school board property to pick up the green bins. So we can compost, but it relies on our custodial staff being willing to volunteer to wheel them out to the city property, depending on the way the school's built. That could be like a quarter of a mile out to the property. And then pay attention so you can go pick it up so it doesn't get kicked along down the street. It's working. We've got a lot further to go. But that's something that's being driven by the schools. We're also involved in waste reduction. We've had a huge reduction. Our waste reduction has been about 30%. We still haven't met the targets that we have to meet under our waste management plans, but we're getting there. Our recycling programs, recycling is a difficult issue for everyone. We can send it to recycling plants, the markets are disappearing for that. So we're starting to look at it the other way now. Our supply chain people, the purchasing people, we're trying to look at different ways we can acquire products. How do we cut down on some of this packaging? The fact of the matter is, in spite of our reliance on technology, we still generate an awful pile of paper and cardboard. We need to find better ways, though, of minimizing that. It's something that we're committed to. And when we talk about carbon offsets, we have looked at, and we've had discussions with Natural Resources Canada, the Ministry of Education. We would love to be able to try to build a carbon neutral school or a net zero school. And again, this is not meant to sound like whining. The funding the ministry gives us does not truly consider the true cost of ownership over the life of a building. Right now we're facing that. Across this province, it's not just us, a number of schools were put up in a hurry in the 60s, the early 70s, mid-70s, in order to meet the pressures of the baby boom, in order to meet the pressures in boards where 1969, the small local community schools became part of school boards. You saw the little one-room schoolhouse closing, the common school maybe being built on the county line. Those had to be built in a hurry, and they had to be built without a lot of money. We're paying the price for that now. You know, some of our schools that are 75, 80 years old have less problems than the schools that were built in the 1980s. And so we know we have to use our operating dollars. We try to extend into the building systems as much as possible. For a few years, at least, we were trying to offset the increased carbon from utility usage by tree planting out at our outdoor ed center. I have to tell you, we haven't been able to do that the last few years. In the 50s, Ottawa suffered Dutch elm disease and lost 98% of the elms. So at some point, thought it'd be a good idea to replace every single one of those elm trees with ash trees. Beginning about 6 years ago, the emerald ash borer hit Ottawa. We've removed about 1,500 trees from our schools alone. We've replaced about 900 of them, and that's where our budgets go. You know, it's something when you start to talk about leaks and roofs, but it's just as important to deal with that outdoor schoolyard. We've been fortunate in dealing with the Evergreen Foundation and with a number of other groups. We're trying to get schoolyards greener. Again, because of when they were built, where they're built. There's a lot of paving. There's a lot of stormwater that we contribute to. We're getting better in our new sites, and we're excited about that. But where we're really making the biggest difference is what we call, what you read as user behavior. Teachers, kids, staff. We're in the process of installing 3 charging stations for electric cars. They're symbolic. You know, if you had to develop a business case that said, why did you do that instead of one of our other energy initiatives, I'd be hard pressed. But we are trying, wherever possible, to work with our partners to minimize parking lot space. It'll be different here, I'm sure. But in Ottawa, if you ever take an aerial photo, you'll see in the high schools, and with us, you'll have pockets of neighborhoods where there'll be a Catholic high school, our elementary school, a French elementary school. Municipal bylaws on parking have never really changed. So what it means is you'll see vast empty spaces in the high school parking lots ever since graduated licensing came into effect, 15, 20 years ago. We've seen fewer kids driving to school. But the elementary schools, with the introduction of childcare, with the introduction of early childhood educators in every single kindergarten, we can't cope with the parking. And the fact is that we have people in Ottawa leaving urban areas to go to suburban areas to work. Our transit system works great if you're going downtown. It doesn't do you much good if you're trying to get across the city. And because of the two rivers and the canal, we don't have a grid. So we're going at it from a variety of areas. We're learning how to celebrate those successes. We're learning to celebrate it with our partners. I can't tell you how many times we've been approached by some of the vendors, some of the tradespeople that we work with ideas. And they're small ones. But we've got to celebrate those small successes too. It won't be the big ones. If this is going to change, it's the small successes that happen every week and that we need to celebrate. Those are the ones that force me to have to think about doing more work, trying to convince my team we should do it differently. And that's happening across the city, across the province. So whether you're a small business looking at it, there are opportunities to improve your bottom line. There's better opportunities to connect with your customers. If you're someone selling to those vendors, or selling to school boards, or selling to universities, you know, when you talk about value, more and more, things like packaging, things like how you're getting it to us, are becoming more important in how we evaluate our purchase decisions. We like to think, even though we have a division, I think there's 3 people in it, of our Energy Management Conservation Division, we like to think that our entire department of 1,000 people is committed to this. And we're seeing it. We have teachers that'll phone us and say they've found some new product that comes that's not covered in plastic, and can they look at it? So our product evaluation committees can look at it. So I guess I'm here to say we're large. We have the advantage that we can go out and recruit staff, keep them, but we face the same issues. And in closing, I want to tell you that this is one of those things where our commitment is strengthened when we look at the problems we face coming up next. We talked about air conditioning. Only about 35, 40 of our schools have air conditioning in them. And in the old days, when we only had hot weather in maybe the last 2 weeks of June, maybe the first week of September, maybe 2 if you had a really nice fall, we could get away with it. We had temperatures over 30 in May in Ottawa. We had 47 schools that were occupied this summer, either with childcares or daycare programs or summer school. We need to find a way to provide some sort of cooled air. We need to be able to do it in at least some of the buildings. And we need to do it in a way that doesn't totally offset all the progress we've made elsewhere. It's a product of this change that we've seen in volatile weather. You know, the Don Valley floods. I grew up in Toronto. We knew that, but 3 times above the 50-year line in, 8 years, I think you said? That was unheard of. In Ottawa, we have schools. We had one that flooded just because the ground couldn't absorb any more rainwater. It's a school where the field is artificial turf, and the school ended up flooding, the basement. We've never seen that before. So it means we have to work that much harder to see if we can slow the tide We've all read that report from the United Nations a couple weeks ago. But I guess I'm here to say it can happen. We can make progress. And every little step ahead is a success. And when you have a failure, and we've had more than a few, learn from it. And so I'm thrilled you were able to come out today. I know you've got some great vendors that are here to talk to you as well. And I'm pleased to see a community coming together like this. So thanks very much.